All righty, Monica. It has been lovely chatting with you this morning. We briefly went over the role itself and the duties that it entails. But Monica, I would love for you to just jump right into it. Tell me a little bit about yourself, your professional experience, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So my first of all, thank you for even considering me, my resume, and hopefully being able to bring the skills and the experience that I have, of from a large manufacturing company to your client. I think that the experience that I think can benefit your client is that for 10 years, I was basically in an HRBP or HR practitioner type of role where I either was the point of contact and HR leader for my locations in California and Texas, or when I joined the corporate team, then I'm overseeing talent management and talent experience, like recruiting, development, employee relations, and communications for the corporate team, and then assisting and being the coach and the point of contact for the HRBPs at different sites in the US for the Ames companies. So in a nutshell, the 10 years experience at Ames is just the last 10 years, but that's really where I learned the most. And I was able to stay in a stable, long-term relationship with the employer, even though they changed, they went through a merger, being part of Emerson Electric first and then becoming the Ames companies. I was that point of contact where I was able to provide that, I guess, that not just communicate about my state and my sites, but also leading the way in terms of like guiding and coaching the on-site leadership and sharing and collaborating with the strategic and corporate partners about employment law or workers' comp law issues that we may have at my sites. Managing those, going to court for them if we had to, depositions, handling all the files and claims. So basically, end-to-end solutions for HR, whether it's at the desk, employee relations day-to-day, or actually managing performance or exiting and managing employees, or even doing reductions in force.
That sounds amazing. I appreciate giving me an outline as far as your professional experience. I mean, from what you've mentioned, you've been able to work through a company that went through a merge. You work with workers' comp law, employee relations, implementations as well. You mentioned that you've also managed a few sites at once, Texas and California. So you have that background when it comes down to your local, your state, and then your federal laws as well. So tell me about the laws, right? How are you able to be up to par with the laws?
Well, I think that for California is the perfect example that the laws are not just like employment law. You have to be mindful of employment, OSHA, safety, workers' comp, labor relations, and benefits are different over there. The requirements, PTO, payroll. So it's really workplace law. In a way, you kind of have to stay in touch with what's happening, not just in the news, but also like politically, understanding what's changing in terms of bills, what's coming up, so that I'm not the site that, the law changes when a new cycle of administration changes, and then now I have to like throw a last minute, scramble at my employer. I have to be ahead of it. Sometimes for California or for Texas, you could actually participate in the hearings so that you're there on the ground and understanding what's happening when the laws change. But the cool thing about it is that sometimes nowadays you can do that online too, and find out information online. But I think that for those, when it comes to being the on-site rep for employment law, you can't just rely on news or articles. You have to stay on top of politics so that you can be aware of the bills that are on the floor, on the lobbyist floors. That way you're kind of already like saying like an FYI to your employer just in case, and then kind of start preparing for big changes if they do happen to be like being big ones that are going to affect us, not just cost wise, but also like labor wise. And I think that the perfect example was COVID. You know, just jumping on CDC, OSHA regulations right away. You couldn't just rely on just like waking up and hoping for the best. You had to like kind of be on top of it every day.
Absolutely. And I thank you for that insight. Now, we spoke about, compliance and the less, but moving over to HR policies, Monica, how do you manage sensitive investigations or disciplinary actions to ensure fairness and legal compliance?
So at the end of the day, there are employment laws that sort of guide the employers on how to handle employee relations at each state or even county local levels, right? So for example, again, California, they can have their own laws about employment that guides a termination process, right? Or progressive discipline process that leads to termination. But then if I'm in San Francisco, the requirements may differ from LA County, right? So that's where, again, it goes back to employment law first, and then addressing the policies in the house to understand where we're following legal compliance and still be able to produce and have people on the ground, even though we're trying to understand, and be compliant. So I feel like working for a manufacturing company has taught me one valuable lesson, and that's like, I get it. I have to be HR. I have to be mindful of the law, make sure that the policies adhere to the employment law requirements, especially for progressive discipline and terminations that are lawful, but also, or hiring practices too. But at the same time, manufacturing cannot stop because we're trying to adjust to law requirements. So there's a balance that I have to follow as an HR practitioner to be able that I'm still contributing to the production environment of my company, so that I'm not like just like in a way like pulling the plug and saying, oh, we can't have that person on the floor. Like I have to have resources and solutions for my team and not just like address employee relations and make a hot mess on the production floors.
That's right. I completely agree with that. And you mentioned you worked in manufacturing. What are some other industries that you have worked in as well?
Well, for the Ames companies, it was a little bit of both, because we were manufacturing, but also we were in-house distribution. We distributed our own products. So I would oversee both manufacturing and distribution sites. And then eventually joining their corporate team, I was in the corporate office, but guiding the sites. Before that, I worked in the entertainment industry for event productions in higher education, colleges, universities, mortgage companies. And I think the other one was another manufacturing, was auto manufacturer, Isuzu Motors. And then Hayward Pool Products, which was a manufacturer for plastics, which is, those devices that clean your pool.
Yes.
Yeah, Hayward Pool. So those are other manufacturing companies I work for.
Awesome. All right. Well, that sounds lovely. Now, you mentioned payroll. You did a bit of payroll as well. Tell me, what kind of system do you use for payroll, or just really any other system that you have utilized or familiar with using?
So I'm pretty familiar with any HRIS system nowadays, because nowadays they're all cloud-based and they're all very easy to use, cloud-based, web-based programs. Even though they may differ on the way that you process information within it, the shell is still looks the same for all of them. But I've utilized UKG Pro and ADP, Oracle. For higher education, they use something called Banner. So that's their own thing. Manufacturing is a big fan of Oracle, so I've used that with different manufacturers, and then eventually the Ames companies transitioned to UKG Pro, which is an outstanding one. And that's an HRIS system, and typically that includes the payroll part or the timekeeping part. So even though at the Ames I never printed the checks, I was processing the changes for payroll and doing the audits. Before Ames, I was actually at Isuzu Motors, at Hayward. I would actually process payroll for the state of California and for different states at the mortgage company too. I think the mortgage company, I was in their payroll department for a while, processing payroll for like 40 states in Canada. And I've done Canada payroll too, and 401k, which is very complex, the Canadian 401k system. Well, at the time when I worked for Isuzu, I was in charge of that, doing U.S. and Canadian payroll and 401k processing. So I've done, I guess, different, because nowadays the HR function has shifted solely to HR and not actual payroll printing and processing checks. The latest version of it is I am the change management person of information for payroll and tracking time and attendance, but not the printer of the checks, which is more like an SEC requirement for publicly traded companies. So then typically finance prints those, even though we process the changes in HR.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate that response, and give me further insight to your skills, the systems that you have utilized. Monica, I would love to know, how do you balance being an employee advocate with supporting company objectives?
I think the number one thing is having compassion for people, because they're human, right? We're all human, and compassion comes first. As long as I lead with compassion and good intentions, I can be telling the person that I'm terminating them immediately, or that they have a RIF notice, and I'm going to uplift and uproot their plans for the near future in the next 6 months for the whole family. And I still have to show compassion when I'm doing that. It's easy to show compassion when I'm saying, hey, are you being promoted or hiring you? But when it comes to the tough things, so like progressive discipline terms, RIFs, that's where I think that the Ames companies gave me the opportunity really to, because I eventually had to close my California locations, my location and the Texas. Eventually, that's why I ended up moving to corporate Florida, because at some point I had closed both my locations, little by little over the span of like 5 years. So I went through several RIFs, just those types of situations. And especially for my sites, everybody knew that I would go through them. But believe it or not, I had exit parties. We actually had like parties the last day, even though we were closing the plants. So for both my locations, every time we will have a RIF, we will have a party for that team leaving. And I think that that's where the compassion shows, because you, as a company, we made that decision that we wanted to be compassionate about, even when we were closing the sites.
Wow, that's an amazing story to tell, and really shows how you advocate for your employees, even when it comes down to one of the harder situations, nonetheless. So it's wonderful that you were able to implement that, Monica. I'm going to go ahead and end this interview. It truly has been a pleasure speaking to you and getting some new professional experience. But don't hang up on me quite yet. I want to continue chatting with you off the grid here. Thank you.